The night air was thick with mist, clinging to the ground like a blanket of smoke. The streetlights flickered weakly as if struggling to stay alive, casting eerie shadows on the empty streets of Hollow Grove. The city had always been quiet after dark, but tonight, it felt different, too still, too quiet, like the city itself was holding its breath. In the distance, the soft rumble of an engine broke the silence. A lone car, a black 1968 Dodge Charger, rolled slowly through the city streets. Its headlights sliced through the fog, illuminating the cracked pavement and the broken glass littering the road. There was no driver inside. The car moved with a strange, deliberate motion, like it knew exactly where it was going. Its engine purred softly, the hum of the tires against the wet road echoing through the empty streets. Street after street, it traveled, turning corners without hesitation, stopping at traffic lights that flickered red even though there were no other cars, no people, no one. It had been like this for weeks now. People had noticed the car, but no one dared to get too close. It was always the same, appearing out of nowhere, gliding through the city in the dead of night, only to vanish before dawn. Some said it was haunted, others said it was cursed. But the truth was, no one really knew. But there was one man who was determined to find out. His name was Tom Delaney, a mechanic who had lived in Hollow Grove his whole life. Tom was the kind of man who didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He believed in facts, and things he could see and touch and fix. But the car was different. It defied everything he knew about machines, about the way things worked. And that made him curious. Late one night, Tom waited. He sat in his old pickup truck, parked at the corner of Main and 6th, where the car had been seen almost every night for the past week. His eyes were heavy, and he fought to keep them open, the dim glow of his dashboard doing little to stave off the fatigue. But he was determined. He had to see it for himself. Hours passed. Midnight came and went, and Tom was beginning to think it was just a myth after all. Maybe the car didn't exist. Maybe it was just a story people told to spook each other. But then, just as he was about to call it a night, he heard the low, steady growl of an engine. His heart raced as he sat up, his eyes darting down the street. And there it was, moving slowly through the fog, its headlights barely visible in the haze. The Charger. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he watched it approach. It moved with a strange fluidity, almost like it was alive, like it wasn't just a machine, but something more. Tom's hands trembled as he gripped the wheel of his truck. He had expected to feel scared, but what he felt was something else, something darker, something he couldn't quite put into words. The car passed by him slowly, almost taunting him, daring him to follow. Without thinking, Tom turned the key in the ignition and pulled out behind it. The Charger's taillights glowed red in the distance, and Tom followed, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what he was going to do if he caught up to it, but he couldn't stop himself. He had to know. The chase was slow at first, almost casual, as if the Charger was toying with him. It weaved through the city streets with ease, and Tom followed, his eyes locked on the mysterious car ahead. But as the minutes passed, the Charger began to pick up speed, and Tom had to push his truck harder to keep up. The streets blurred by, the fog thickening around them as they sped through the city. Tom's knuckles turned white as he gripped the wheel, his heart racing as he tried to stay close. But no matter how fast he went, the Charger was always just out of reach, always just a little too far ahead. Then, without warning, the Charger took a sharp turn down a narrow alleyway. Tom hesitated for a moment before following, the walls of the buildings closing in around him as he raced down the alley. His headlights illuminated the brick walls and the wet pavement, but the Charger was gone. Tom slammed on the brakes, his tires screeching against the road as he came to a stop. His heart was pounding, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he stared down the empty alley. It was as if the car had vanished into thin air. For a moment, Tom just sat there, his mind racing. He couldn't believe what had just happened. How could a car just disappear like that? He shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. But before he could move, a soft tapping sound came from behind him. His blood ran cold as he slowly turned his head. There, in his rearview mirror, he saw the Charger, sitting just a few feet behind him, its headlights off, its engine silent. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the car. It was impossible. He had just chased it down the alley. There was no way it could be behind him. And yet, there it was, as real as the cold air seeping into his truck. The tapping came again, louder this time, and Tom realized with a jolt that it wasn't coming from the car, it was coming from his window. His breath caught in his throat as he slowly turned to look. A face was pressed against the glass, pale and ghostly, its eyes hollow and black. Tom's heart stopped as he stared into those empty eyes, unable to move, unable to breathe. The face smiled, a slow, twisted grin that sent a chill down his spine. Without thinking, Tom threw the truck into reverse, slamming his foot on the gas. His tires screeched as he sped backward, the truck lurching down the alley. But as he looked in the rearview mirror, the Charger was still there, following him, its headlights flickering to life as it closed the distance between them. Tom's hands shook as he gripped the wheel, his mind racing. He had to get out of there. He had to escape. But no matter how fast he went, the Charger was always right behind him, its engine roaring as it chased him through the city. Street after street, turn after turn, the car followed, relentless, like a predator hunting its prey. Tom's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He didn't know how long he could keep going, how long he could outrun it. But he knew one thing: he couldn't stop. If he stopped, it would catch him. And if it caught him, he didn't want to think about what would happen. But as he sped down a narrow side street, the truck suddenly sputtered, its engine coughing and stalling. Tom's heart sank as the truck coasted to a stop, the headlights flickering off as the engine died. He was trapped. In the distance, he could hear the Charger's engine, low and rumbling, getting closer. Tom's hands trembled as he fumbled with the keys, trying to start the truck, but it was no use. The engine wouldn't turn over. The Charger appeared in the rearview mirror, its headlights glowing ominously in the darkness. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he watched it approach, slow and deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. He knew there was no escape now. The car had him. The Charger came to a stop just a few feet behind him, its engine idling softly. For a moment, everything was still. Tom sat frozen in his seat, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. And then, the car door opened. Tom's eyes widened in terror as a figure stepped out of the car, shrouded in darkness. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if it had all the time in the world. Tom's breath came in shallow gasps as he watched the figure approach, its footsteps echoing through the empty street. The figure stopped just outside Tom's window. For a moment, everything was silent. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, it spoke. "Get out." Tom's heart stopped as the words echoed in his mind. He wanted to move, to run, to do anything but stay there. But his body wouldn't listen. He was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The figure reached out, its hand resting on the window. Tom could see its face now, pale and ghostly, with hollow, black eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. "Get out." Tom's mind screamed at him to move, but his body wouldn't obey. The figure's hand moved to the door handle, and with a soft click, the door swung open. Tom's breath caught in his throat as the figure leaned in, its cold breath on his face, its hollow eyes inches from his own. "You shouldn't have followed." Before Tom could react, the figure grabbed him, pulling him out of the truck with a strength that didn't seem possible. Tom's scream echoed through the empty streets as he was dragged toward the Charger, his body limp, his mind racing. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was the car's headlights flickering to life, the engine roaring as the Charger sped off into the night, leaving nothing behind but the echo of Tom's screams. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the city was silent once more. The fog rolled in, the streetlights flickered weakly, and the black Charger disappeared into the night, leaving only questions and fear in its wake. No one ever saw Tom Delaney again. But the car kept coming back.